good afternoon everybody.
Afternoon.
I'm Jenny Johnson, one of the co-founders of My First 5 Years.
And I'm Alistair Bryce-Clegg, the other co-founder of My First 5 Years.
So we're here today to speak about friendships. I think we titled today's live, Does Your Child Have Friends and Does It Matter? And I think as parents we know that friendships is one of those things that can be a minefield and can cause all sorts of anxieties for us as parents. So a really interesting topic to explore today. And we've had quite a few questions logged with us beforehand that we'll be touching on. And I'm also going to keep an eye on questions coming through in the live as well, and I'll pose them to Alistair as we go along.
Okay.
So I thought we'd start just sort of developmentally to begin with about where friendship, true friendship, kicks in. But then we've got loads of questions that sort of delve into that from parents a little bit further. But just that developmental point of view of where that true connection kicks in.
Because friendships are really interesting, like Jenny was saying, and as adults, you know, our friendships are really important to us, and we do forge some of those friendships very, very early on. But actually there's a difference between playing together and becoming friends. So I think we're going to kind of distinguish friendship as making that deeper connection where you are connecting with another human being on multiple levels. Whereas very early on in child development, you will get children who will play together but aren't friends. And even in playing together, there are all sorts of things we can explore about how you negotiate play. So we know that even children who have not got any words yet, so they're pre-verbal, they will do lots of signalling to each other through non-verbal cues. So, you know, noises they make, gestures they make. So that early kind of communication, which eventually develops into friendship, starts really, really early on. But what those children aren't making is a deep emotional connection. What they're making is a play connection, and that's slightly different. So very early in children's development, you'll get that interaction, and that really, when children interact with each other because they're finding some common value that they want to be connected with. But then much later on, we'll explore this as the live goes on, children begin to develop a sense of empathy, or something that's called theory of mind, or often called TOM, where you can begin to have enough emotional intelligence to put yourself into the imagined shoes of somebody else. So try and think how someone else is feeling. And children aren't born with that skill. It develops, and for some children it develops slower than for others, depending on what experience they've got. So real friendship starts to come when children are able to transfer what they are thinking or think about what somebody else might be thinking, and therefore change their view or their intent on a presumption of what someone else might do with it. And then there are all sorts of complexities about how friendships develop over time and how some friendships grow together but others don't, and that's okay. So friendships can be quite transient for children depending on their stage of development.
So you talked about empathy there and theory of mind. Children, very young children, are often quite selfish, quite self-centred. So how can we go about helping? You said you're not born with empathy, so how do we go about helping children understand those sort of really tricky concepts?
Yeah, I think it's scientifically, and I'm really going to paraphrase, and I'm not a scientist, in terms of survival of a very young species, your brain makes you very selfish because it's all about self-sufficiency and survival. So often as adults we can go astray, and we've all done it. The thing where you try and get children to apologise to another child, especially when they're very little, and you back yourself into an apology corner, you say sorry, and they're like, well, no. And partly that's because they're not being stubborn, they just don't understand the concept of sorry or why you would be sorry. Or you might be saying, no, Amelia's crying because you've got 5 sweets and Amelia's got no sweets. Why do you think Amelia might be crying? And they're thinking, I'm not bothered why Amelia's crying. I just want the sweets, so like, give me the sweets and let me eat them. So there are lots of things that are linked to development as we as adults sometimes impose expectations on children that are not typical or appropriate for their stage of development. So when you're thinking about how children develop empathy, it's partly through their maturity, it's partly through their cognitive development, so how their own internal brain is developing, but also it's through experience of seeing empathy playing out in a way that they can understand it. So a really good way to kind of demonstrate that is through talking through story, because there's loads of empathy in children's stories, and that's not an accident. It's because children really struggle with the development of empathy. But reading the story, but also as an adult, then having a little bit of a conversation around the structure of the story and why that was a nice thing to do and how that might have made that character feel, or giving your own examples in very pointed interactions around empathy, as well as in your day-to-day trying to make those empathetic things that you do quite obvious. But again, being really realistic that young children will really struggle with this on the whole, and so don't back yourself or them into corners where you're insisting on something that's never going to happen, because actually it's not, I'm going to say again, about the stubbornness of your child, it's about their stage of development.
Yeah, I think, being aware of childhood development and where they're likely to be in the journey, which is one of the things our app helps with a little bit really, is that better understanding for parents. I think as well in the free guide we listed some books that are great to read.
So we reference to books, and also we have a Miffy book club on our Instagram and Facebook you can have a look at. But absolutely, the app, and our social, personal, I haven't got my teeth in there.
Social and emotional.
In our apps, social and emotional development stream, we do kind of talk you through that development of empathy and the things you might expect your child to be seeing and doing, and also just for parents, just to reframe what you're looking at a little bit so you see it slightly differently and aren't upset by your child's seeming lack of empathy, and actually just realising that it's part of their cognitive development and there are things you can do to really support that.
I think I found that really helpful. I've got 3 children, 2 of them are older, one of them came sort of 10 years later when I was more grounded in understanding developmentally where she was likely to be at.
Yeah.
And I think if you have more realistic expectations of your children's behaviour and what you can realistically expect from them, that's really, really helpful.
And I know both you and I have got 3 children, and I think when you've got siblings, you will often see this play out in sibling interactions, because just because you are family doesn't mean you're friends. So you're not born into a friendship group. You're lucky if you're friends with your siblings, but it's not a given. You have a kind of family bond that's slightly different to why you would choose to make a friendship bond. But also you've got children, especially because mine are fairly close together, that were at different stages of developing empathy. And also understanding in a family you can get some great attention by playing siblings off against each other and off against the parents. So you've got this heady mix of the psychology of behaviour of the family and also the development of children. But it means that you will see lots of examples of falling out around a non-empathetic expression from a child of, no, you can't have that, that's mine, I want it. And again, it's not always to do with friendship, it's often to do with development.
So the say sorry thing was something that we learned a lot about in the concept of a nursery, because I think this idea that demanding a child to say sorry to another child when they really have no understanding of the concept. So what are more appropriate ways for us adults to intervene? Should we be intervening? And if we are intervening, what can our role be in helping children understand?
So again, that's probably a live of its own.
Sorry.
When you're looking at things like conflict resolution, and often adults are really keen to step in and sort out and resolve. Everybody stop, right, you do this now, you do this.
Yeah.
So there's an element where adults can model appropriate behaviours, but also children only learn to resolve a conflict by being in a conflict and then resolving it. So whereas you don't want them literally having a fist fight, having a fallout and trying to get fall back in as a result of that fallout can be a useful opportunity for adults to scaffold, but also sometimes, and it's really hard to do, and we talk a lot in my first 5 years about things that parents and educators find really hard to do because it's counterintuitive, like saying be careful all the time. But sometimes it's good to let children actually have a fallout and see it through to the very end, as long as they're not going to harm each other, because often they will find their own route through that. But I think when it comes to things like apologies, if you are an adult who's intervening in an altercation that's occurred between 2 children, and it's often very hard to get to the bottom of what that was because they might not have the words to be able to articulate it, they might not know because it might be in a subconscious response, saying that they must apologise to each other might be a really difficult concept for them to grasp. But also you do want some kind of restorative dialogue. So what often is done is that the adult might apologise on behalf of one of the children. So I'm sorry that you are feeling like that. I'm sorry, Jenny, that Alistair has made you feel like that. I am here to look after you and make sure you're all right. I'm really sad that he's made you feel like that. because then the child who is feeling the upset gets the kind of repairing, interaction. But it's not like saying to the other child, you must apologise for something you don't understand what you have done. And sometimes the insistence on the apology, and say if you don't apologise then this will happen or this won't happen, you end up in a state where you've either got to say, oh look, it doesn't matter, what I said was going to happen now isn't going to happen, or you have to stick to your guns, which also can be quite upsetting and quite damaging for the child who just wasn't aware of the concept of apology.
Yeah, so potentially escalating an already tense situation. Yeah, we're trying to pour calm back onto the situation. I think they often say try and meet an angry child with your calm. It's easier said than done sometimes, but
it is thinking about them like the kind of visual of your child who's angry or upset being like a lit flame.
Yeah.
And what you're trying to do is just put the flame out, and what you don't do is pour fuel on the flame, otherwise that's when it all kind of erupts.
Yeah, I think we've all been on the receiving end of not having that great interaction and making a situation worse. We have got quite a few questions, and we've already been chatting for 10 minutes, believe it or not. So I'm going to delve into some of these questions while keeping an eye on the live as well. So this question is coming from a parent saying, should I be worried about our almost 3-year-old not forming friendships, and what age would you expect to see this? I'm just going to add one other and then pour COVID over the situation. So my 3.5-year-old finds it difficult to approach other children. How can I help? And I know you've been doing a lot of work internationally on the impact of COVID, and I kind of felt these questions may have a little bit of a link to that. So opening the door to explore COVID and the impact it might have had on children and friendships. And
that was my first thought in terms of the ages of these two children that we're talking about, that it could well be that, children struggled sometimes with these concepts pre-COVID, so this is not a COVID issue, but what COVID has done is really put a spotlight onto it, and also more children than was usual or typical are finding that they haven't had the experiences that prepare them for that large group interaction. So lots of children during COVID of this kind of age have had some amazing experiences at home. Lots haven't, but lots have. Lovely interactions with their family, lovely attachments with parents and family members who they saw. So there are lots of positives. But usually during that first kind of 18 months to 2 years, most children will be doing community play groups, nursery, childminder, pick up and drop off at school, school playground, running around. And what they do with that is learn about these initial interactions, these verbal cues, these non-verbal cues. And so when they come into, for lots of children, that kind of first gathering of playgroup, nursery, preschool, kindergarten, wherever it may be, school, they come equipped with some of those skills that they've learned by osmosis through their interactions with others. And what we're finding is because children haven't had that experience, when they're now coming into those settings, they are not having or demonstrating a lot of those skills. So lots of settings are reporting, as well as parents, that children seem to be struggling to make friendships and connections. Now that's not to say it's a doom and gloom story. What we're basically saying is all children have missed out on 2 years worth of typical interaction with others. So what we need to do is just make sure that when we're introducing them to spaces, settings, all the things we've talked about, time is given to allow that to happen. So not to you jump onto the usual roadmap that would be when you start nursery or when you start reception or playgroup. This is kind of where you'd usually go, but to acknowledge that these things are a truth and therefore say, right, when we are starting in this space, we need to give lots of opportunity for children to have those interactions through free play, supported play, role play, social interaction, lots more opportunities to do that, to give them a chance to develop it. Because the likelihood is they will, they're just a little further back on that development route.
Cool. I'm just going to say hello to someone as well that's joining us from Brazil, which is pretty cool.
Hi.
Carol works at the British School of Rio de Janeiro. So hello.
I've been to the British School of Rio de Janeiro
twice. Name dropping.
Yeah. It's a lovely school it is too.
He has internationally worked with schools all over the world, so I'm very jealous of all the places you've been and worked.
Yeah. Hi, Carol.
Anyway, just going back to impact of COVID and what we can do to support children. So talking there about children struggling to socialise and what more we can be doing. What can we do to help children learn these skills if they have had a period of missed opportunity, and maybe they've got really strong relationships with the family members that they spend some time with, but not so much outside the front door.
So also I think we're talking about the difference between playing together and being friends. And again, as parents, it's good to kind of split those two in your head and not worry so much if your child hasn't got what you would recognise as being that kind of deep friendship. Some children find one person they really connect with, and they have one special friend and other associates who they play with, and other children will have a wide circle of friends, and that both of those things are okay. You know, for some children they don't need that one special friend. And also things change as you change. So when you make that deep connection, it tends to be when your levels of maturity as well as interest are the same. So you share so many things and you meet on so many levels. That's when you begin to have a friendship that goes beyond just one particular interest. But if I've got the cars out and you want to come and play with the cars, and then we play together and we have a lovely half hour of playing cars, we haven't then become lifelong friends. What we've done is shared a moment and an interest. So friendship is where there are multiple layers of interest that mesh, that mean in most things that you do and most things that you say, you find a connection within those. And then children who tend to spend a lot of time together tend to grow together because they come across the same sorts of opportunities at the same time, therefore they experience them together, therefore they add them to the mix. So what I'd be looking at as a parent is just opportunities for children to make that play connection. And play is, our app is just full of play.
Literally plays everything.
Play is a massive vehicle for learning, but it's also a vehicle for making a connection. So the more opportunities you can give your children just to engage in play, and again, you know, the app talks a lot about this. That doesn't always mean setting up an activity, although you can give your children some kind of inspiration. Just opportunities to be together in spaces with stuff that allow children to find those connections. And they might find a connection somewhere really bizarre that you wouldn't ever have imagined, which is the risk of making things a little bit too set up and too structured. When you've got a variety of things that children can engage with, and it doesn't have to be toys. I mean, we've talked a lot about cardboard boxes, tubes, outdoor environment where there's literally using the space around you to create your play. The more of those you can do with the more variety of children, then the more opportunities you're given for your child to rehearse those kind of cues and that interaction, but also learn from the other children they're interacting with.
Yeah, and I think as well, lessons learned for me, because by the time you have your third, you're a little bit more wise to these things, is just to back off and let the children figure out what they're going to do and what they're going to play with. Yeah. And I quite often, certainly with first time round parents, see them getting far too involved in the play between children, or in my view, getting far too involved, and not just giving them the opportunity to figure things out themselves and to figure out what they want to do themselves.
And there's that saying that is, I think I've said it before, like boredom is the mother of invention. And so it's about children sometimes being given a very broad remit, and then they will find things to do within that. But also for very, very young children, so babies and early toddlers, it can be that you give them some stimulus to engage with. So whether that be baskets of things to investigate or whatever it may be, but just keeping them broad and letting them find that connection.
So another big part of friendships is the falling outside of friendships, and some of the mean things that children say to each other. And what we can do to support our children when they have been genuinely upset and hurt by an interaction that's gone on. And I've, over the years had loads of these where you almost want to get stuck in yourself and have words.
How dare you?
Yeah, how dare you to a 3-year-old child? That's not going to go down well with their parents either. But what do we do when either our child is having mean things done to them, or what also happens, if we're honest, is that our child is the one being mean or saying something mean, because they're not angels. They all go through either side of this.
So I'm not going to do this justice in the time that we've got, but there's a huge psychology around being a human being, and children are humans who are developing into adults, and therefore they have to experiment with all of the kind of nuanced behaviours around being human. So things like power. Power is a major feature in what it is to be human. So even when you share a conversation, like Jenny and I would share a conversation, somebody's talking, somebody's listening, so the person who's talking is in control of the situation, and then you jump in and you assume power. So there's all sorts of really subtle, even down to things like adults saying to children, time to get up, time to brush your teeth, time to have your tea. So there's a lot of control that happens to children, well-meaning control from adults that are making the day work, but children are often quite powerless in the space that they inhabit. So when they are rehearsing and practicing that kind of acquisition of power, that will often come through them trying to take the lead or dominate. And when you've got multiple children all trying to dominate, as you would with adults who are all trying to dominate, that's when you have fallouts. It's also really important, I think, to remember that behaviour is not the child. So we can often label children as being naughty or badly behaved or nasty or rude. And I think when children articulate themselves with language, it's often just about their inability to express what they want in an appropriate way, so they express it in the only way that they can. But you'll often find in fallout, especially with younger children, that's exactly what it's about. And it'll be around things like, you're not coming to my party, you're not going to be my friend, you can't sit here, you can't play with this particular toy. And it's about possessiveness. I'm in control, this is my toy, and I proclaim that you can't play, you can't join in, we don't want you. So of course that makes the child on the receiving end of that, which we've probably all been in our lives, feel dreadful. But it makes the child who's on the proclaiming end of that very much all-powerful. Now what can happen is, obviously with power can come a great sense of positivity, even though it's
negative. Like Spider-Man then.
And power comes great responsibility. No, it does. But so children sometimes repeat those behaviours because even though they're not nice, they get negative attention, and subconsciously that's a really positive thing. Yeah. So I think what we need to do with the children who are on the receiving end of it, and obviously it's hard when you're talking to a 3-year-old as opposed to a 13-year-old, because of course this doesn't go away.
Yeah.
It will happen all the way through your life, and saying that to your children. When you're in the workplace, this will be happening to you. When you're in the retirement village, and I know I've done lots of intergenerational work, you've still got those people in the retirement village in their 90s who are being evil to the person sitting next to them. And it's just like, are you 3 or 93? So it's part of our human psychology. But trying to get children to understand that when they say, we don't want you to play, it's not about you. It's about the fact that, and it's trying to translate that message, which is a complex one, into a way that the child's on the receiving end can understand it. And then flipping it, if you're in that situation, it's talking about that empathy and that empathetic understanding, the theory of mind stuff. So saying to the child who is saying these things, if it's not about that's a horrible thing to say, you're a horrible person, because they're not. It's more going down the line of saying, when you said that, I kind of understand why you might have said that, but how do you think that made that person feel? And going from that angle of it, but making it count for something. So not saying, how do you think she feels now because you said that? That kind of trite in the moment, just trying to deal with it quickly, move on, is never going to have any real impact. It's about often, as we say a lot in my first 5 years, revisiting later and saying, right, that was a moment, we were all in the moment, but now we're reflecting on that. How do you think and how do you feel about that? And again, with very young children, I've had some really positive outcomes with that, and just trying to articulate it in a slightly different way. And again, stories are really good for one for that. You'll find loads of children's stories that talk about conflict and conflict resolution within the context of a story. And again, that's no accident. It's because children really struggle with this kind of thing.
I think listening to you, it feels like confidence plays a big thread in all of this.
Massively, yeah. So psychology will say that self-confident children tend to have stronger friendships, not necessarily more friendships, but stronger friendships. Because it makes sense if you think, I'm going into an arena where I am going to try and make some friends, and I'm really confident about my own abilities, my self-worth, my self-esteem. I am not going into this thinking, nobody's going to want to be my friend, are they going to talk to me, are they not? You're going in thinking, of course they are, because I'm Ace, why wouldn't you want to be friends with me? So children who have a high level of self-confidence usually have more successful friendships, because they are just more, they expect that people will want to be friends with them. It's not from a kind of big-headed point of view, it's just from a, that's how it works when you're a really well-equipped human being. So I think, again, part of this, and it's really hard as a parent not to pass all of your anxieties, your conscious ones and your subconscious ones, onto your children, but it's trying to empower your children with self-confidence, and, you know, to give them the best possible start and battle some of your own inner demons, which we've all got. about how you feel about yourself in terms of being able to make those friendships or go into those social situations.
Do you know what you've just reminded me of there with my first? I think, because I had friendship issues at school, I was really worried about when I first started school, and my most important thing was that I wanted her to have friends. And right from the first time we picked her up from preschool, I was saying things to her like, who did you play with today? Who are your friends? You know, really just, well, I think literally every day I was asking her, who did you play with today? And I think she quite quickly tuned into the fact that, oh, I can get a bit of attention. Yeah, definitely. And she started to say, nobody wanted to play with me today. And it really did make me anxious. So I nipped in to see the teacher. I was like, Jess doesn't seem to be making any connections, she doesn't seem to have any friends at school, and the teacher literally said, honestly, if you were a fly on the wall, observing her during the day, she's having fun, she's joining in everything, she's definitely got friends, she's not on her own at playtime, you've honestly got nothing to worry about. She said, but what do you say to her when you pick her up? And I realised as she was sort of playing it back to me that I was making this thing about friendships the most important thing and the very first thing every day. The teacher simply said to me, please stop asking her, just ask her how her day was. Just a much more open question, and all of a sudden the issues went away. And I'm not saying that friendship issues for all my girls over the many years have not ebbed and flowed, but I was definitely passing my anxiety on. And I've had that very same conversation now loads of times when I owned a nursery with parents saying I'm worried about X, Y and Z, and me asking them to reflect on whether it was their anxieties that they're passing on. We definitely do it.
Because we do this all the time as parents anyway. The first thing you say to your child is, how's your day? What did you do today? They've got to imagine if you've gone to work, not a good way to, if you had like your busiest day at work where you had loads of different projects going on and somebody's like, oh, come and see this, come and do this, now come and do this. And you had an ace day at work, you'd be shattered by the end of it. And if you got picked up by somebody saying, right, tell me about your day, start at the beginning, what you just like, right, just don't even speak to me until I've had my tea. And that's what our children are like at the end of the day. So they'll often say, what did you do today? Nothing. Who did you play with?
Nobody.
No one. And so you're like, oh my goodness, what's going on? They're not doing anything at school. And actually, they're having the best time ever. So we got very wise to that very early on, much like you. And then what we used to do is leave it, pick them up, you all right? Do you want a snack? Whatever it may be. And then usually bath time we would say, tell me your best bit of the day, or even bedtime. And then when you said tell me the best bit of the day, and then had time just to decompress, you then got loads of information that you probably didn't want, but it was way better than saying, like, tell me who you played with, tell me what you did today, because they're just too exhausted to think about it.
Yeah, literally, it was like being grilled from the minute we picked them up. So I love that, actually, just give them space.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we've got this confident child struts up to a group of other young children, and I'm talking about, you know, our space, our specialism, the sort of 3, 4, 5-year-old children, and they're shunned from the group. And I, again, have observed my child have this happen to them and seen the look of utter, you know, sadness on the face when that happened. So what's going on there? Why are those children being so mean, and what can I do to help my child that just had that happen to them?
Well, again, it's dead complex. As human beings, we have a kind of tribal mentality, so we tend to group as families, and we tend to, especially previously, we'd be in communities, so villages, you know, and now the world is our kind of global community. So we're pre-programmed to kind of have that territorial view around the people who are in our lives and make our bonds with them. And I think sometimes when new children approach a situation where there are a group of children who are all friends together and have got that kind of shared interest in that agreed friendship, an incomer can be really threatening to some of the children in that group, especially if they've not got particularly high self-confidence themselves. So if you're part of a friendship group, but you're not a very confident child, somebody else is coming over, your subconscious brain, and it's not often a conscious thing, is thinking, what's all this, going to break up the group, I might not be part of it, I might be... So there's different levels of different cognitive strategies all going on with these children. So the simplest solution is to say, go away, because you're new and you're different, so don't want you in our group, go away. And it's got nothing to do with the child that's approaching, it's got everything to do with the psychology of the group, and particularly the child who's doing the kind of shunning. We talked about power earlier on. If you're a protagonist, a leader within a group, and you like the fact that you somewhere subconsciously get all that kind of a fulfillment from being in control, people doing what you ask when you ask, and then somebody comes along who you don't know, are they going to topple you from that position within the group? obviously at 4 they're not thinking in that way. This is not conscious cognitive thought, it's a subconscious urge. So I think what we've got to try and do, and again it's not easy, is to talk to the children who have been pushed back in ways that make them understand that it's not about you, this is not about you the person, this is about those children who've got really good friends like you are with such and such and so and so and so and so, and maybe because you've come up and you're new, they're feeling a little bit worried because they don't know you, they don't know what, and try and approach it that way and then give strategies for how about we. So maybe we try it differently, maybe we invite so and so around for a play date, so it's not the whole group, it's just one of them or 2 of them. Rather than I'm going to go out there and give them a piece of my mind and say, how very dare you, she's come to make friends and you've been mean, apologise now, because all that does is pour fuel on the flames and everybody then gets all anxious. Yeah. So it is about that message, I think, for children early on, about it's not always you because they don't know you, they've just seen you. It's maybe they're a little bit worried about how you're going to kind of be as part of their group and try and do it that way.
I think as a parent, you know, friendships are just one of the hardest things to deal with. You want your children to be happy, you want your children to be treated in a kind way, and it is really difficult. And I think that you've just given some really interesting common sense strategies there. You've helped us as parents reframe what we're seeing, how children are responding to our children, and us as adults trying to have a little bit of empathy as well. And that can be hard because, our children are our joy and our dream, and they're precious, and when people are being mean to them, it's really, really difficult. But I just think there's been some really helpful, useful things there. And I think, again, the guide that we've got in the bio does a bit of a deeper dive because, believe it or not, Lester, we have done our half hour. It has gone. Have you got one takeaway that you'd sort of give parents as a wrap up?
Friendships come and go, and you'll have children who are best friends, and then they cease to be best friends because they mature differently, their interests diverge, and they move away from each other. What they will always have is that seed of a friendship. So like my boys now, 2 of them in their 20s, will go back to people that they were friends with in primary school who they maybe don't see on a daily basis, but they've got that kind of nostalgia around the friendship that they had and what they did. So again, not being too concerned as a parent if friendships do appear very strong and then aren't, because as we all grow and change and mature, but especially for children who are going through that early stage of development, we need different things from different people, and it's different friendship groups that will provide that.
And actually, I know you've spoken about the fact that it's just not appropriate to expect our children to be friends with absolutely everybody. It's not realistic. I
think it's a really bad message to give children that we're all friends here and everybody's going to be friends with everybody else and the world's going to be a big happy place. Because I think we teach respect and we teach tolerance and we teach, kindness, but it's also a realistic expectation. There are people in your life who you will love, and there are people in your life who you'll be really good friends with, and there are people in your life who you won't get on with and be really good friends with, but you can still be kind and respectful to those people. Because it's an awful shock when you think the whole world's going to love you, and then suddenly you find out that either you are feeling like this about somebody or they are about you. So it's that idea of giving children age-appropriate but realistic ideals around the world that they're going to inhabit, and that is that not everybody is friends with everybody.
Fab, we will definitely wrap it up there. So, free guide that you can download from the bio. We'll also put this on Watch Again so you can share it with friends or just revisit some of the things that we've talked about. We have a couple of lives coming up in the next 2 weeks. The next one's on the 26th of April, and we have a guest joining us there called Karen Wood, and that's all about teaching your child to ride a bike and how we're going to ditch the stabilisers to do that. So that's about a practical life skill. And then the next one we're doing together is the 3rd of May, a Tuesday at noon again, and that's about parents understanding risky play and the benefits of risky play.
Yeah.
So we're really looking forward to seeing you. And Alistair's going to have to shimmy over and touch the button in a minute. He's not wandering off in a strop.
Yeah, somebody else said last time, did you just get off at the end? I was like, no, I have to come and push the button to stop the live.
We have to push the button, so that's what we're going to do
We're all dead
next.
techie, aren't we?
Really tech. Thanks for joining us.
Good to see everybody.
We've really enjoyed it.
See you soon.